Yep. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Late Nite Electric. This is our very first episode. I wanted to kind of give a brief overview. I know that these past few weeks have been very chaotic, and I think that a lot of us have been having a lot of conversations and kind of understanding what Black Lives Matter is all about. And I think that as we look at our news feeds and our social media, and we're starting to see a lot of things start to return to normal, I really didn't want to launch this show directly into a commentary on music and festivals and things. I kind of wanted to ease into this week as we see more people start moving more towards kind of normalcy during this period of time. And so I really kind of wanted to give a brief overview. Late Nite Electric, I want to be kind of a casual conversation. This is a place where we can exchange ideas, both about the music scene, but then also things that really matter to us. And one of those things specifically would be Black Lives Matter. And so a part of that today, we're going to actually explore an interview that I was able to fortunately have with an active police officer. We did end up distorting his voice so that just in case anything was to come back on him because of anything that he said. But that is how we're going to go ahead and open our conversation. But before we get into that, I did want to go ahead and introduce the team that I have with me, the Late Nite Electric hosts that will be guiding you through these conversations as we go. So I'll go ahead first. I'm Carlos Lopez. I am a writer, music enthusiast, and so I'll pass it off to the rest of the team.
Hi everyone, I'm Jesse. Just moved here, very new, from Michigan. I like to make music, and I guess I'd also say I'm a music enthusiast. I'm also going to be the main production manager for this show. Be doing all the stuff with OBS and whatnot. And starting now, I'm always going to open the show asking everyone in the room one thing that made them smile today, and then a random question which just helps us get to know everyone here more. And this week it's going to be your zodiac sign. So I'm a Cancer, and one thing that made me smile today was having my friend Bingo Bango come play on my live stream that was a couple hours ago. He always kills it. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris. I am an Aquarius, and honestly I had sushi today, and that made me smile. Put a smile on my face.
Sounds delicious.
Sushi is always delicious. Yes, I'm another Jesse as well. I'm a music enthusiast, DJ. Something that made me smile today was performing on Jesse's live stream today. Or mixing with friends is always something that gets my juices going. And I'm also an Aries, if that matters to anybody.
I'm sure it'll be helpful later.
I'm sure it'll be helpful to somebody.
And continuing with that, I already introduced myself, but I'm also a Cancer. And something that's made me smile today was probably, I don't know, the live stream with my roommates when they play music.
That was mine.
That was mine too.
Okay. Well, I guess, I don't know, Pumbaa mostly.
Pumbaa, my dog?
Pumbaa, your dog, is pretty hype actually. So.
Makes me smile. All right,
so,
let's get that interview kicked off.
So as we, right before we play this interview, I just want to let you guys know. So the interview was pre-recorded. We did distort his voice, and what we're actually going to have is we're going to have some photos of Black Lives Matter protests from kind of all over the country and stuff. So without further ado, let's move right into the interview.
Take us away, Jesse.
Hi. Well, thanks for joining me today for this interview. Let's start with how things have been going in your neighborhood.
Things are going much better. Fortunately enough, we have just settled down to like a peaceful protest, which is amazing. I believe in all of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So what are some of the things that you've been seeing? What are some of the most pressing issues that you've seen as far as both the protests, any of the looting, any of that, I guess?
So now that the looting has stopped, it's been a really good thing. You know what I mean? Because me as a black person, like, this is an issue that we've had to deal with for my entire life, right? So it's awesome that this is actually being paid attention to.
That it's getting some voice.
Yeah, no. Like, it's actually being paid attention to, which is an amazing thing right now.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That's good. That's really good to hear too. Why don't we? I wanted to take a brief moment just to kind of talk about why it is that you became a cop.
So I became a police officer because I was born a crack baby. I mean, my mom was on crack, and my father got murdered when I was 15. I became a police officer to make a difference, to make a change.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm sorry about your dad, but it's amazing that you became a part of the change that you wanted to see. That's awesome. Moving more towards what you do every day as a police officer, could you tell us a little bit more about what your day-to-day life is like?
So every day I just try to bring the community closer to the rest of the world. So I work in an all-black neighborhood, and I try to get us to understand the law in a way that we can then move forward and do what we're supposed to do.
Do you feel like the community is supportive of that endeavor, or like you're in that community kind of every day, so I guess, like, what is that like, I guess, for you, kind of seeing what your community looks like and how you relate to it?
Me and the community are cool. Is the community cool with everybody else who wears the uniform? No. No. But me and the community are great. Like, I go to schools, I go to old people homes, like, I talk to everybody. Like, me and the community are great.
Yeah.
They don't feel that way with everybody, though.
Yeah. Well, would you say that other officers or your department either encourage that or kind of take the lead with that community involvement?
No, definitely not. But as my community outreach team, that's what we do.
Nice. Oh, so you guys have a community outreach team?
Yeah, no. Like, my community outreach team, that's what we do. That's our job.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Do they actually do it everywhere in the city? No. But we do. So the community outreach team, we're out there, we're doing it.
That's awesome.
So I know that we had talked a little bit before, and we had talked about a lot of the tasks that kind of get pushed onto the police department that you really don't have. They don't offer a lot of training for, like, mental health crises and things like that. But you guys are generally the people that are called for those. How has that been, I guess, as we as a society have continued to push basically everything we don't want to deal with onto you as police officers?
No. So we get calls for basically everything, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're parents, we're mental health.
Social workers.
We do it all.
Mm-hmm.
Are we paying for it? No. Unfortunately, no. So the mental health aspect, there's only so much I can do.
Right. There's probably also limited resources, right? I mean, like, because you probably don't have a lot of options as far as like what we as a society offer in terms of mental health crises. Like, you can't. I mean, your options are probably like hospital or jail. I mean, that again, that's speaking as a person that doesn't know, I guess. So maybe I could be incorrect.
So we do have mental health institutions that we bring people to.
Oh, okay.
And they get evaluated. And here in DC, it's a 72-hour period that they get evaluated over.
Like it's a holding time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do have that. Jail's not the option for mental health.
Hmm.
We don't bring people to jail for mental health.
Oh, okay. That's good.
We do bring people to places that will evaluate them. But unfortunately, we have to deal with them not knowing exactly what to do.
Yeah. As someone who's in that career field, and we're kind of all just, it's very easy, I think, from the outside public to be like, oh, get rid of that budget line item. But those are people's salaries and jobs, and I definitely understand that. So, and we as a country are not super great at like retraining society, as far as like, we shut down factories and we don't retrain them, sort of thing. So I guess what have been your thoughts on this defunding, dismantling tagline, and how and what do you see as kind of some solutions forward?
Honestly, I can't even answer that. Just in the position that I am in and my stance, I can't answer that. I just hope that all things move forward the way they're supposed to.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. You gotta have faith that like that those kinds of things will come together, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is, I think, a large issue. And I think that, like, I think the daunting task is that not everyone's really sure where to address it,
Right.
When people see, I mean, and obviously this means a lot to you, and I'm sure that you've made a difference in your community and to the lives that you've impacted in your career, and I mean just in general as a person as well. But as an officer, what is it that you wish that people would see as far as when they see the badge and things like that?
Just know that person has a family to go home to. Like, I have a mom, I have siblings, I have a woman in my life that means a lot to me. I have that woman's family that means a lot to me. You know what I mean? Just know that I have a family to go home to. So just know, like, me coming home every night means something.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want people to actually understand. Like, we're not animals. Not everybody who wears that badge is bad. But no, like, they have a family to come home to.
Yeah, definitely. I think we as a society sometimes find it really easy to vilify, anybody that kind of stands against us. And I think that it really detracts from the point, which is that, all life should be respected. And I think that it's really sometimes easy to overlook those facts when you're grouping everybody together, and kind of not looking at it from a broader lens.
Also, I just want to add, like, when I don't have my uniform on, I'm a black man first.
Hmm.
I've been a black man my entire life. When I retire, I'll be a black man. I get treated the same way that every black man does. I grew up in a place that police were very, very, very racist. I've been put down on the ground. I've been pulled over multiple times in my life. I was pulled over one summer 21 times. So I understand how people feel that the police treat them. It is not fair. And us as police, we have to do better, but that's why I became a police officer, so I could do better.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate that actually. So as an African American officer and a police officer and a citizen when you take that badge off, what steps or resolutions do you feel like the community can actively participate in aside from? I'm glad that the protests have turned to more peace, have basically become all peaceful, and that the looting and stuff has stopped. That's really good. But what kind of active things would you like to see the community kind of start to do to provide some healing or provide some restoration, if possible, I guess?
You know what? I'm not sure. Because the community right now is so mixed in their feelings, I'm not sure what they can do because so many people are so mixed up in it. If everybody was on the same page, I feel like we could step forward, but not everybody's on the same page right now.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I do think that it is important that everybody kind of gets on the same page, but I think that we are getting there. I think that people have really been awoken to the issue. I think that this message has reached more people than it has in the past, and I think that on a level that's hopefully sustainable and something that they will take into practice as well. Do you have any advice for communities out there?
Become one.
Become one.
Become one. I need everybody to become one. Like, I need everybody to be on the same page and work together.
I agree. I think that is the solution. I really do.
Yeah, everybody needs to become one. Like, let's start moving forward together.
I absolutely agree. I really think that you are absolutely right. Well, that was actually all of the questions that I had for you today, and so I really appreciate you taking the time and calling me and getting this interview figured out. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, the only thing I could actually say is we need to move forward as a people together. Like, not separated, not doing anything against each other. We need to move forward
Together.
as a people together.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
that's it. That's all I have to say. Like, you could edit that out, but
No,
that's how I feel.
No, I actually completely agree with you. I think that I think that this movement and everything that's happened in the last 3 weeks has been really important. I think that it gained a lot of attention. There have been a lot of changes. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but there are a couple web pages right now that are running huge lists of the hundreds of changes that have happened that would not have happened without these 3 weeks. So I think that absolutely, I think that your statement is 100% correct, and I think that it is important that people understand that we are in this together. That we as a society created the environment that we want to live in, and we have an active role as community members, participants in that community, in order to kind of make this place the place that we want to live. So I absolutely agree with you. I think that we need, in order for us to move forward and have learned anything from this, we need to come together and realize that this isn't something we can all just do by ourselves. No one make this change in a vacuum.
Right. No. All right, bro. I mean, this was a great conversation. I'm glad I was able to do this with you.
Me too, actually. There was a lot of stuff that I learned in this interview that I didn't know about you before. So I really appreciate you being so open with us and being able to talk with us about this.
Huh? I mean, I gave you how I felt. I gave you my feelings. So we there now.
No, I do. I feel that. Thank you. I appreciate that. And welcome back. I know that was a bit of a lengthy interview. There's a lot to unpack there. I know that that was actually the first time that anybody else in the studio heard that interview for the first time. So I guess I'm going to open it up. And again, feel free to chime in the chat. I want this to be an ongoing conversation. So kind of a little different than probably the other shows that you may watch. But let's get started.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there. Obviously, his emotions are deeply rooted into the issue, which I think is an interesting perspective, at least to have. Yeah, I think the one interesting thing that I took out of it was that, I mean, besides the overall goal, I mean, he couldn't comment on some things too because of the position he was in, which I respect that as well. But one of the things is that the uncertain or the unclear path of what is the right answer. And I think he, as someone who has felt these prejudices and discriminations throughout his life, and then also is a firsthand police officer, the fact that he is also unclear on how to move forward, I think is directly the result of what we're seeing today. Just the major issue, there's a lot of emotions, like you said, are tied into this, so everyone's frustrated, everyone wants to see progress, or not everyone, but at least the people we surround ourselves with want to see progress. And I think part of that frustration and stuff comes from the emotion, and the uncertainty of what is the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of those things that you did touch on that I did want to kind of talk about, and this was something that he and I had talked about before, and so kind of off the record, he had some opinions about it. And then in the interview, he didn't necessarily want to touch on it, which is totally understandable because it is his job and his livelihood. But I did want to kind of briefly talk about this defund the police and dismantle the police, because that is an important area that I think that we've been seeing a lot of people touch on. And I think it makes people very antsy. I think that the first time I mentioned it to the officer that I did an interview with, he immediately became very defensive about it. But I think that once we started that conversation, it kind of made more sense. So I'm going to throw up this kind of flyer that explains what does defunding the police actually mean, and kind of what some of the alternatives to having a police system that, instead of just tackling all of our social services issues, that we would actually have designated people for those things. It doesn't make sense, in my personal opinion, to send social workers with guns, basically, to deal with some of our, mental health crises, or just any type of welfare check. It just doesn't make sense why you would need that kind of level of security for those kinds of services.
Definitely agree.
Yeah.
Cool. So what other things did anybody comment on did anybody else want to comment on the interview in that sense? Are we hearing anything on the chat?
Chat.
Yeah, I don't, just piggybacking, I guess, off what you said too. I mean, like having an actual department that is sent out to actually handle issues that aren't violent, I think is something that needs to be looked into. Even if the person is, I mean, obviously the police are allowed to defend themselves, and they have the right to go home at the end of the day as well. But even if that person is guilty, they don't have the right to kill people.
And I think that's kind of where, if you really abstract it, I feel like that's probably the biggest conversation starter is like, and my personal opinion is that if you thought about everything you thought justifiably deserved the death penalty, are those the things that you feel police are killing people over? Because if you're in that mindset of you need the death penalty if you're shoplifting,
Or
like
fell
that's a
asleep at
very
Wendy's.
different perspective, you know.
It all comes back to proper training. You can't expect what is it, a couple like a 12-week course to become a cop, 16-week course, I believe. You
In
can't,
a couple months, but yeah,
yeah,
still.
or 3 months. But yeah, you can't expect all that training in that short amount of time. You have to specialize, like you said in the interview, a community outreach team. They more training with that as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was important to note how he said that they don't bring people to jail for mental illness, but I feel like that also could be kind of a cloudy gray area because sometimes people just seem violent and whatnot in a tantrum, which is a mental illness.
Well,
Well, it's also important to note that he was referring to specifically where he is, and and there were a couple times I think that in talking to him before and stuff, and even during the interview he kind of expressed that like not every officer takes the initiative to be involved in those kind of community outreaches, and also not every community is going to treat mental health crises the same. So just because they don't take somebody to jail that they can't figure out in that situation for that specific area doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case in every state.
But the thing is they're also making that judgment off of zero information and lack of training. They're required to make that judgment whether it's a mental issue or whether it's a violence issue based off of no training and no understanding of what mental illness is or that side of it even is.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
they're
Well, that's
putting them in a
just-
position to handle our for lack of a better word, extra, like just they're taking care, like they're the parents essentially, but they don't need to be.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and he mentioned that too in his interview. He said that they're basically called to be parents. They're called to be guardians. Any a social worker. They really have a lot of hats that we've given to them.
Yeah.
100%.
Kind of now the thing is that, and then I think most importantly when we're talking about this and kind of looking for the way forward as protests still continue this week actually, throughout the country in different areas around the world, and I think that towards the end of the interview when we start talking on like how do we move forward from that, and I think that when we were looking at the protests and some of the other stuff, it's very easy to forget that actual change has been happening, and a lot of different places have been implementing a lot of different varying steps. And so I did want to kind of touch on some of those. So we know that, for example, Minneapolis, their city council went ahead and voted to dismantle and defund their police in Minneapolis, right, where a lot of this has started. The charges have also been upgraded against the police officers involved in George Floyd's death. A lot of monuments, and I think that we have some photos here too. A lot of monuments have been removed from all over the country, which I think is an incredible and over time kind of move, in my personal opinion. It's interesting because if you look at the way that Germany treated any type of representation of Nazism and those kinds of symbolisms, they basically made everything illegal right off the bat. And I think that really did help Germany move forward in a very big way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. With such a diverse population and so many people as well, it's hard to get. Obviously, we're seeing it in our, not to go into it in our politics with our partisanship. It's such a split, and we're also not feeling like we're being heard by the people that we side with. So that's, I think, all ties into part of the issue as well.
And just remember that this isn't a moment to the movement, that we gotta keep doing what we can to continue for changes that we want. It's working slowly but surely. We see that in the news, but we just have to keep going. So don't just go to one protest and stop and say you did your part. Support black businesses. Just do what you can when you can.
Do you want to play the?
Continuing steps.
Yes, continuing steps.
Yeah.
So, and that's absolutely correct, Chris. Like, I think that yes, absolutely, this is a movement, and it needs to continue regardless. Right now, we're putting up some great advertisement pieces of what you can do to continue being supportive and being an ally during this period of time. So you can see it continuously educating yourself on anti-racism. It's not enough to just not be racist, but also be anti-racist. I think that I always think of the show like What Would You Do? Because I think that what we're seeing is a lot of like, what would you do when, you know, your grandparent or your cousin or whoever says something racist, and whether or not you kind of just let it go because you're like, oh, they can't change, or you actually say something and actively say, this is not okay. This should not be normalized in any sense. And those are the kinds of activities and things that we can participate in. So along with these things also, I did put together a few resources, if you want to go ahead and switch to the browser. Yeah. So some of the things we also did want to talk about when we are talking about this movement and collective steps moving forward. So I put together just a few things to kind of help us look at some of these. So yeah, no worries.
There we go.
So the first thing we wanted to talk about, or at least I wanted to mention, was there's a nice article on USA Today that kind of explains the difference between franchise owners who donate to a Republican or Trump cause versus the restaurants themselves. And one of the things that they kind of touch on is that your fast food chain and boycotting them, although it does do something if everybody does it, but in the long run, they're not contributing enough money to make that big of an impact in most of the campaigns anyway. And so you can kind of pick and choose. However, knowing that the food is not necessarily the place that you're going to want to hit your pocketbook, there are a couple other resources if you want to pull open. There is donegood.co, which has actually an active link of companies that you can avoid that do give money to Trump's campaign, if that's what you are concerned with. And then there's also grabyourwallet.org. And this one is actually a really cool website because it also includes messages that you can send to these companies to let them know that you are not okay with some of their business practices. So this is a very easy way for you to get involved in some of the brands, and then also just changing where you're spending your money. Had any of you guys seen these beforehand?
No.
No, have not.
Cool.
You showed me earlier.
Oh, okay.
And then, do you want to touch on the things that have changed?
Yeah, so again, touching on some of the things that have changed, I included 2 articles in this resource. Are you also checking the chat, just in case?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sweet. I also included these are news articles that kind of go over the different things. Police departments have changed all over the country. A lot of reforms have been done. There are a lot of rule changes that have been made different, calls for reduced funding for a lot of police forces. And I think that's really important to also kind of understand those numbers. When we're looking at like a city like LAPD, for example, when their budget is $1.6 billion, and it's actually it's more than the entire military budget of Ukraine, and they have 5 times the amount of people. So a country with 40 million people spends less on their military than LA does on their police force. And I think that that's a very important and kind of daunting thing to wrap your head around, because it really doesn't seem like that should be equivalent.
No, not at all.
Absolutely. And then,
There shouldn't be military forces in our streets. You know, we're putting more money into that than the military forces in the country, so.
and then you just posted this.
Yeah, and then so kind of as a longer part of this conversation, of course, as we move forward from protesting to activism and actually participating in change, of course, there is going out and voting and getting other people to vote too. And the thing is, I know a lot of times in certain situations in certain states, especially if you're not in a swing state, it doesn't seem like your vote makes a difference because of the Electoral College. But there are ways for you to make impacts, and there are other organizations that you can be involved in. There are lots of ways to participate in your local government, and those smaller changes can lead to bigger changes. So one of the other things that I wanted to highlight, specifically for us as San Diegans, because that's where we are from, but I also wanted to know, and this is something that I think everyone should really understand about your own community, is that like I had to look up a lot of these people, but now that I've looked them up, I know now like the names of the people that I don't want to vote for. So I know that you can hopefully see it on the screen as well. But November 3rd, we have Barbara Bry, Mark Kersey, Scott Sherman, and Georgette Gómez, all running in districts 1, 5, 7, and 9. Barbara Bry is actually running for mayor. These are all city council members who purposefully voted to increase the budget of the San Diego Police Department by $30 million to a budget of $500 million in police force for a city of 1.5 million. So I'm just, this is something that is definitely close to my heart, and I definitely want to make sure that if you are in San Diego and you see these people, these are the people you don't want to vote for. Barbara Bry is actually in a runoff for mayor, and I literally cannot imagine her being our mayor with that kind of
mindset,
apathy to understanding 6,000 people called into the city council, 6,000 unrecorded, like these are the people, unmanned recorded messages, so not even including the ones that went on the actual agenda, 6,000 messages, and and only Chris Ward from San Diego, the one Republican on our city council, decided that he wanted to vote against increasing the budget for the police force. So these are important things, I think, that that all contribute to our participation in our government and how we structure the rules and the things that we want to live by. So a couple other things as we get ready to close out this conversation. We do want to talk about Blackout Day. So there has been a movement online to go ahead and cease spending, specifically on July 7th. There have been a lot of other kind of dates lumped in there. So I know that there's right now a movement that's saying the 4th through the 7th, don't spend any money. But for sure the 7th, don't spend any money. And this is just, again, to just put our money where our mouth is and really advocate for the changes that we want to see and put pressure on some of these companies that have the power to make those changes. So, one of the things that was in the CNN article that I thought was fantastic is that there are actually companies, because June 19th, which is tomorrow, has not been made a federal holiday. There have been companies like even Nike and Target that have actually made that a paid holiday for their employees. And that's really important to note, that companies can also take the stance and not only support their employees in that way, but then also kind of show back to the government that these are important issues to the people. And
yeah,
I think, did anybody else want to add anything?
Well, yeah, showing support to those major corporations that essentially run our country in a lot of ways. Showing support to the right ones is a big deal. Like knowing that information, and those lists that you posted were fantastic. And I'm even going to go back and look that over again and make myself better acquainted. And I do support this June 7th blackout day, July 7th. I'm sorry, blackout day. Yeah, and then Juneteenth tomorrow is also supposed to be supporting African American industry.
Absolutely.
So tomorrow, if you could, if you know of any, if you can check our list out, show some support to African American communities or restaurant or any business out there that can really help the movement.
Uber and Postmates, they also have a black restaurant-owned section on their app, so they're helping out with even just doing that, so you can support those local black-owned industries.
Yeah, and I know it's a couple extra dollars, but Ben & Jerry's definitely deserves to be your ice cream of choice.
Yes.
If you haven't checked their website statements out, they're incredible.
And delicious.
It's delicious, and these people care. They have like a factory where all of the dough is made for their like cookie dough ice creams and stuff, and they only employ ex-cons. So kind of a way to like help them get back on their feet, essentially, which is hard. coming out, with a record coming out of prison and trying to find something. So they're really incredible.
Their new flavor is called Pecan Resist.
I didn't
Play on word called We Can Resist, but Pecan Resist. So please go out, check it out, look it up. There's a bunch of info on their website about the ice cream and how it came about.
Pecan resist.
Pecan Resist.
Hashtag.
You can't resist. Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps up everything that we want to talk about. I think as we close out the show, I did want to make sure that I emphasize the fact that this is an ongoing conversation. Nothing really ends here. Even when the protests, even when the protests are not visible anymore, and for a lot of mainstream news media sources, they have stopped covering the protests and stuff. I think that it's important that we understand our role in moving forward and how we can take more control of the government and the rules that we want to live in. And I think that those are definitely important steps. I also know that I also want to close out and kind of recognize that this is also Pride, and without all of these movements to have stacked on top of each other, we would not be the country that we are today. And to see the powerful improvements that we've been able to see, the communities reaching out for each other, and I think that this time and in American history will mark itself as a time when the country kind of realized that we are stronger together than we are divided over issues. So thanks again for joining us on Late Nite Electric.
Tune in next
Twitter.
time.
Is on Twitter. We're on Facebook.
We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram.
We're everywhere.
Check us out.
This is our first show. Sorry
first
for
show.
choppy
Yes.
in there. We're getting the hang of it. But
We definitely can. I'm sure that we will find things to improve.
Love is love and science is real.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
Black
you.
Lives Matter. Thank you guys. Love you.